Good to go. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. All right, guys, thanks for joining us today. As Nicola mentioned, I'm James Fox Higgins, and I run a platform called The Rational Rise. And actually, we're in a state of growth at the moment, so I'm looking for new contributors to it. We basically like to host interesting conversations and talk about dangerous ideas while we can. And that's what I'm here to do today. The topic is winning the battle with alternative media. I wasn't really consulted about the topic, I was just given it, and it made me think, what is the battle exactly? What would it look like to win it? And what is alternative media and how can we use it? So I want to explore those ideas. Now, so far I haven't been banned on Facebook or YouTube yet. I've managed to navigate these topics with enough subtlety and nuance to not trigger any of the people in the administrations of these companies, but we're all acutely aware that the platforms that we love and that have informed us so well over the last decade are at great risk of having freedom of speech removed. The worst that's happened to me so far is a few of my more popular videos have been demonetized by YouTube, but so what, I'm not getting that many views. We've got about 10,000 followers so far across our platforms after 2 years, so it's been a slow and steady growth. But let's talk about the battle. Can anyone offer any suggestions about what exactly this battle is? What are we all here battling for? Throw some ideas at me.
Survival of liberalism.
Survival of liberalism.
Survival of free thought and ideology in your mind, because
Yep.
it's everywhere you go.
Yep.
So
Free thought from ideology. Yep. So what about a defense against coercion? The battle is a reaction to tyranny. It's not an offensive battle, it's a defensive battle. It's not an ideological battle. Many make it an ideological battle, but this is a natural battle because we're living beings, and when we're under threat, we want to defend ourselves and the extensions of ourselves, which are our property. So property rights is a huge issue for us as libertarians, and the question of what do we really own? Objectivists and classical liberals recognise that we own our body, and the products of our labour. But I contend this somewhat. We have a moral claim to these things, absolutely, but pragmatically, we only own that which we can defend, right? In the thought experiment that Andrew offered us this morning, the robber ultimately owns your money if he's able to take it from you. You need to be able to defend your property to have a pragmatic claim to that property. So we need to maintain the systems and rights that enable us to defend our property. I think that's the key battle here. The battle for us who identify in whole or part with this libertarian movement, we're in an active defensive campaign to protect these things. So what would it look like to win that battle? Throw some ideas at me. Shout them out. No hands, just shout out your ideas. What would it look like to win this battle?
Lack of fear of communication.
Freedom? What was that other one?
Lack of fear of communication.
A lack of fear of communication. Interesting. What else?
Controlling our own life.
civil liberties.
Civil liberties, control over our own lives. Yep. Self-determination. Good. How about a law-enshrined protection for freedom of speech like the US has? How about recreational cannabis? Gabe, am I right? How about married gays? We've got that now. How about deregulation of marriage altogether? That would be good. How about universal gun rights? How about recreational nukes?
I was going to say that.
Yeah. Right? Mutually assured destruction for everyone. Freedom, yeah. Is it absolute and permanent freedom from tyranny? Or is that a far-fetched utopian ideal? Is it about maintaining the balance between social norm-based laws enforced by a minarchist government that stays small? Or is it about every man being entirely responsible for the protection of his own family by personal force, technology, or outsourcing? It's certainly not about giving a Bill of Rights and carte blanche to a massive violent cartel, because history shows that a government left unchecked becomes tyrannical, almost necessarily. The minarchist vision requires just as much vigilance as an anarchist one. We must be ever vigilant to defend freedom. Don't let people tell you in this fight that you're being offensive. You're not. You're not the ones promoting violence. You're having the threat against you and you're being defensive, and it's totally justified. So how do we stay vigilant? Justin gave some really good categories of activism this morning, and he hinted at the power of a generation of men who are taking personal responsibility in their lives, something that Jordan Peterson's been working hard at promoting. Taking responsibility in your personal life, in your marriage, in your family, in your community. And there's no more, I believe, there's no more powerful force than a collective of men with common social norms and brotherly love who have women and children that they love and want to protect. You know, men with something to lose are far more dangerous than men who have nothing to lose, I think. Short of an open war or a violent rebellion against the government, how do we defend ourselves against this coercion? Well, information, knowledge, discussion of ideas, what we're here to do this weekend. And the media has traditionally been the way that we get the ideas out there en masse. It's a system of conveying news and ideas and debate. But the mainstream over time has stagnated into vastly opposed ideologies. You know, for a lot of people, their idea of news is Fox or CNN. And there's so much more nuance to be found in the middle, but it's not being found in the mainstream channels. So what is the alternative, and why is it necessary? Well, the alternative media are independent voices who are stepping outside of the establishment conversation. YouTube was revolutionary. You know, most of us remember the days before broadband. Some of us remember the days before the internet at all. And almost everyone except the youngest among us remember the days before YouTube. And YouTube has changed everything. It's a revolutionary platform. But of course that's changing now too. Written social media, text-based social media like Twitter and Facebook, and then now we've got the emergence of the edgelords and the shitposters and the meme miners, and they're contributing to the conversation certainly, although I agree with Andrew's skepticism about how productive it is. It's certainly entertaining. We have encrypted chat rooms now, we have messaging platforms and virtual private networks. We've got technology that hides us from the watchful gaze of Big Brother. We have self-publishing platforms like never before. The barrier to entry for the written word is almost gone. We've got Kindle Direct, which used to be CreateSpace. We've got Ingram Spark, which has an international printing network. These barriers are crashing down repeatedly because people keep innovating. Technology keeps changing the landscape. And of course, the establishment keep trying to rebuild these barriers in various ways, but they always get beaten by innovation. I'm able to publish my book, The Ghost of Emily, which is full of dangerous ideas, full of controversial discussions, and I don't have to ask a publisher for permission. I've self-published it, and it's easier than ever. You can get a copy this weekend. But I'm not beholden to anyone, except, of course, the violence of the state if they choose to make this official hate speech, which is bound to happen eventually if enough people pay attention. So help me to spread my hate speech. But I can publish these ideas of dangerous ideas at my own risk because of technology and innovation. So why do we need to support and cultivate alternative media above all? I say that alternative media in its various forms is a necessary exercise in freedom of speech. It is a place for dangerous ideas. It's also a place for terrible ideas. And it's a place for evil ideas. But they all need a voice. And freedom of speech necessitates that they all have a voice, even the worst of the ideas. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, as we often say. These ideas have to get out there. If we force them underground, they grow in terrible, cancerous ways. But that said, freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from the consequences of your speech. A lot of people make that mistake. A lot of the shitposters make that mistake. You know, if you're going to provoke people just for the sake of provoking them, if you're going to be an arsehole, people are going to hate you. If you're going to be a misogynist, you're not going to have a good time finding a wife. If you're going to be a Nazi, you know, you're going to receive a lot of pushback from all sides. And rightly so. So what are the threats to alternative media? Most of them are pretty obvious. We've got politicized echo chambers, even in platforms as revolutionary and wonderful as YouTube. It's become politicized. We've got this hate speech Gestapo in the tech world. We've got these new codes of conduct that prioritize ideology and the protection of minorities from offense, of all things. We've got double standards, you know, terrible double standards on the social media platforms. You can be proud to be Asian, you can be proud to be Jewish, you can be proud to be black, but you're a deplorable Nazi if you express any pride in being white. Now I think pride, collective pride, is silly, but you should have a right to express that pride, even if it is silly. In the UK, we've got thought police who are making more arrests for people saying mean things to each other on Twitter than for carrying pliers in your pocket in the local park than for the growing number of violent crimes that are occurring. The police are not doing their job to protect people against real crimes. We've got this new class of crimes, of hate speech and offence crimes. Meanness is suddenly more of a priority than real assault and rape and murder. So, what happens when I get thrown into Facebook or YouTube jail? I think it's only a matter of time. I'm trying to walk that line in my conversations deftly, but I'll slip up eventually and I'll say something that is way outside of the Overton window, and I'll express it poorly and I'll get thrown in jail. I'll be kicked off these platforms, and I know several people who've been completely wiped from these platforms without any warning, without any opportunity to repent and follow the rules. Of course, most of us, we get a warning first, but some people are just deleted outright. And these monopoly social media platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, they have total control over who is on their platform. Now, is the answer to that problem to get Daddy Trump to regulate the platforms? Hands up if you think yes. Hands up if you think no. Okay, we're pretty unanimous on that. I believe no as well. The answer is to innovate. The market always wins in the end. I truly believe that. New technology is always emerging. When we have a problem in one of these platforms, somebody creative comes along and creates something new. BitChute is the new alternative to YouTube. It's small and it's crap at the moment, but it could really grow. And it's got a commitment to freedom of speech. That's important. We've got a new internet emerging. We've got spaces that the government can't reach and can't control in the internet, and this is great. The innovations are smashing the boundaries and the barriers. And we've got permissionless innovation happening everywhere. Uber was a radical technology, and the government, of course, pushed back, and they lost because people loved it. So, what about government threats to freedom of speech directly, outside of the corporate side of things? I think the answer to the government threats is to be engaged at all levels. It's to promote non-violent cooperation in the home first. Don't hit your children. They may be controversial for some of you, but spanking has been totally debunked as an effective source of child rearing, and it establishes for the weakest and most vulnerable in our society that might is right. And that there's no need to defend your ideas or your boundaries with speech when you can just use violence. If you set your children up with a foundation of violence, they will be all the more willing and ready to accept the violence of the state. So be a radical, peaceful parent and promote those ideas first, because I think it begins with our children. The childhood experience is also hugely important. Most of us have had a hard and emotionally difficult time to break free of the violent paradigm that we were fed in state schools. I certainly was. I grew up a leftist, among leftists, taught by leftists. And I had to really suffer a bit to break free of that, and it was important to do so. But we don't have to put our children through that. Liberty or tyranny are reinforced in the schools, and if you take your children out of the public schooling system, you can help to free their minds of that. Homeschool is an option, or look for great private schools. That's the free market option. Schools that explore ideas of objective virtue and universal morality. Or start your own little school. Permissionless innovation. Put a cooperative of parents together and work together. And as we've discussed already extensively today, the tertiary education sector is the stronghold of the left at the moment. And it's where these young, vulnerable kids who've been beaten up by their parents in some cases, they've been beaten up by their teachers emotionally and intellectually in school, they're now radicalized into social justice warriors by their Marxist professors. So to those of us, everyone here, who are already grown, I think we must be politically engaged, as we are, and we must be willing to make pragmatic compromises in the pursuit of liberty. Being a utopian or an idealist or an absolutist will only drive you into one of those echo chambers and prevent you from making any impact. So we need to speak up, we need to speak with nuance, we need to acknowledge, as Andrew rightly pointed out in his mini speech, we need to acknowledge and build upon the ideas that your political foes have that are right, because the left aren't wrong about everything. They do have some things right. Some of their instincts are totally correct. even if their conclusions are crazy or erroneous. So I want to make the case that the alternative media is much, much bigger than YouTubers like me or writers or any of these social media platforms or any of the new platforms that are emerging to deal with the issues that social media faces. It's much bigger. We are the alternative media. As Brendan pointed out, that individual, that one-to-one conversation or that community that you have around you, if you believe in these ideas, you have an obligation to speak to and listen to the people around you to help them understand why liberty is better than tyranny and why the outcomes that they're looking for are not wrong. Most people, I think, are inherently good and want good things for people. They want good outcomes. None of us here, I believe, would want the needy to suffer needlessly if we have an opportunity to help them. We just want it to be done by voluntary means. So we need to talk to the people around us and act as though, even if you don't have your own YouTube channel, even if you're not a published writer or a self-published writer, even if you are not engaged directly with the social media as a content creator, engage with it in the sharing of memes and of videos and of getting into discussions, but most importantly, in your real life, face-to-face, day-to-day, talk to the people you meet. Don't hide behind the social media and the internet. We are the alternative media every day. We're individuals with the power of speech, and that is a gift. You don't need the big platform to make a difference. So I think winning the battle, it needs to happen at all levels. As parents, as individuals, as members of the community, as members of churches, if that's what we are, as people who are contributing to the conversation on the social media platforms, as people who are tech innovators and creating new platforms. There are so many levels to what I think the alternative media really is, that to be engaged at any level you can, and do not hide, be bold and speak up while we can, because time is running out and we need to speak up now. And I know that's what we're all here to do, but especially today, I think there are some budding young activists among us today. Be bold, guys. Speak up. That's my idea on how to win the battle, but I'd really like to open the discussion up with you guys now and take some questions and see if we can sort of mine it out a little bit more together. So, yeah. Thank you.
Notice, like I'm 42 now, and I used to watch TV, but I've changed a lot over the years as I've gone through the internet and alternative media. I've noticed my behaviour changed a lot with the influence of alternative media away from the mainstream media, the newspapers, the television. Like, I barely watch television anymore. I just play games, and we don't talk about any of that sort of stuff. And I watch a lot of YouTube, but the problem with the alternative media YouTube is it actually can make you more enraged, actually more stressed, and more angry, and perhaps you should go back to the media. Because I'm thinking that's probably the right idea.
All of my darkest chapters over the last few years have come from YouTube binging. So I think you're right that there is a danger of getting too caught up in the narratives and the clash of ideas. And I mean, Brendan said he's losing sleep at night. That's not cool, man. You've gotta just breathe. The world is a scary place, but if we let ourselves get too caught up in worry, then we lose our sense of gratitude for the things that we do have. And at the moment, things are great. Like, look, we can convene here and talk about these ideas that are massively triggering for some of our political foes and expect it to be a peaceful affair. There are some threats to that, and we need to defend this, but yeah, it's a great time to be alive. And with the technology that's enabling us to mobilize and to share these ideas, it's the greatest time to be alive ever. So let's keep that perspective of gratitude and maybe limit how much we expose ourselves to the horrors that you'll find all over YouTube. Any other questions?
Yeah, you talk about innovation being the solution rather than regulation, but how is that actually going to happen in practice? Are we going to ever get an alternative platform to Twitter that people are free to use? Does it need some sort of organisation to put it together, or are we just never going to get there?
What do you mean by some sort of organisation?
Does there need to be libertarian movements, GoFundMe to fund the technical development of something that we will all use.
Probably, but I mean, there are people who are just investing their own time and money in creating these platforms, and what we need to do is try to support them. Because if we're truly against what Google are doing as a company now to betray freedom of speech, then we need to support the alternatives. And I struggle with that, you know, like I see the need for it, but I'm addicted to the platforms that have the monopoly. They've existed for so long and they're so good.
Yeah.
They work so well. And then the alternatives always pale in comparison at the beginning. But we can change that if we engage with them and support their monetization platforms, or even, you know, innovate ourselves by creating GoFundMe campaigns. There are so many ways to innovate that we've almost got no excuse to not be part of the innovation. You know, if we're just sitting around on YouTube, then we're part of the problem in a way.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a point about supporting the networks. My name is Ray Champion. I blog on Cadillacsy, and I am absolutely scandalised at the number of people I've met already that don't watch Cadillacsy. Now, hands up who does regularly visit Cadillacsy.
I'd say that's a minority of this room anyway.
Well, heavens above, does somebody need to, do you know Cadillacsy?
I've heard of it, but I've not spent any time there. I think I've read one article.
I've read articles.
This is a libertarian blog, established in 2005 by Jason Soon, taken over by Professor Sinclair Davidson, RMIT. Judith Sloan posts there, Steve Cates posts there, I posts there. Several anonymous people, very well placed in Canberra and elsewhere, post there with inside information of what's going on around the place. Just let me implore you to Google up Cadillacsy and just have a look and see what you find.
Phone's out, we'll wait.
On that note, LibertyWorks also has a very excellent blog that is edited by my colleague Nicola Robb.
And did I mention the Rational Rise is also this school thing online?
Correct. And on your note about state violence, if you listen above, that is an F-18 practicing for river fire.
I thought we triggered the government. I thought they were sending in the troops to shut us down. We're not quite there yet, thankfully. Just on the topic of Cadillacsy, I'll speak at the risk of being offensive to just say that while Cadillacsy may be indeed very good in the content, it's obviously not being very effective compared to some other platforms, and I commend you in promoting it. This is what we need to do, is proudly promote the platforms that we support, and make sure other people see them. Be bold. Like, have you got a pile of cards to give to people to show, you know, or are you going to approach everyone one-to-one and make sure they're on their phone looking at Cadillacsy? Yeah, great. Like, we need to be bold in promoting these platforms, because if we're timid about it, and I can be very timid about promoting my own, but I need to resist that temptation, because now is not the time to be timid. We are smothered by the platforms that have monopoly. We are smothered by the monopoly that the left have on the tertiary sector. The Overton window is shrinking rapidly. We've got to push back and proudly promote these platforms to be effective. There was a question back there.
How do we mobilise? That's the biggest question. The left are very easy to mobilise, but we need to be able to put bodies on the ground.
Bodies on the, like, how do we mobilise physically? Well, it depends on to what end, I suppose, because the way that the left tend to mobilise physically is to put up blockades and violently protest and throw things at people, and I don't think we want to do that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, more public rallies, more marches. You know, Sydney Watson hosted the March for Men recently. That was, you know, controversial, but it was effective. Again, that boldness to be able to go out there and know that we're going to have things thrown at us, to rock up to a Stefan Molyneux and Lawrence Southern event, knowing that there's a risk of violence, and to do it anyway. You know, because I spoke to people in the lead up to that who had bought tickets, but because of all of the hype in the mainstream media against these speakers, they chose to stay home because they were afraid that they would either be physically attacked or they'd be doxxed, you know, have their photograph taken and their their private details disclosed. You know, people were at risk of losing their jobs if they were seen at these events. You know, so we're in the corner at the moment, and we need to push back, but not with violence, obviously.
International Freedom of Speech Day, next Saturday, 6th of October, 12 noon, Lakemba and Melbourne and Bendigo. And I have cards with me if anyone wants.
Excellent. There we go. There we go. He's answered the call to action. International Freedom of Speech Day. You know, I think that's the same day as International Melting Snowflakes Day. Funny that.
Which media figures on the left do you respect the most?
You expose the echo chamber that I live in. I'm going to have to think about that, because I know there are some, but you know, there's certainly none on the extreme left or the radical left. So I guess the speakers that I admire, who are left of centre, are sort of so subtly left of centre that they're not entirely left, they're not wholly left. You know, they've got different positions. Like, I'm really trying to break away from the left-right paradigm in my thinking and in the way I view others and the way I listen to the conversation, because I don't think it's productive. It's divisive and it's unnuanced. You know, you could argue I'm left-leaning on some things. I'm not left-leaning on tyranny. You know, and I share a lot of sympathy with the left for, you know, their hearts are bleeding for the people who have suffered in history and who are suffering today from poverty and from discrimination and tyranny in other ways. They're often misattributing the cause of the problem, and their prescribed solutions are often completely batshit crazy and will only lead to death and destruction. But their motivations are pure. You know, and I think we need to speak to those motivations and also listen out for them in everyone. You know, because they're yeah, it's a really cagey answer to your question. I need to think about it, because I don't actually spend that much time consuming alternative media myself anymore. I'm too busy producing. I'm reading more, you know, and reading books, listening to audiobooks and reading books more than consuming. But I will come back to you about that.
There's David Marr's fighting the good fight on free speech at the moment.
Yeah.
He's copping a lot of heat from his own side because he's standing up for, he's a true believer in free speech.
David Marr.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar, but I'll check him out.
Just a quick one. The term people on the left, there's also not just the Baptists who are true believers, but there's also the bootleggers. So that's a kind of a different sort of category of people that needs different tactics and strategies. A lot of people make a lot of money out of climate change. They make a lot of money out of cultural Marxism. You know, so it's not just that people really believe these things and have bleeding hearts.
Yeah, and look, it'd be entirely hypocritical of me to, and you know, I have been this way, especially when I first took my red pills. You know, I swung hard to the right and started absolutely lambasting the left as though I wasn't one of them for 25 years. I was one of those nominal leftists who was influenced by the rhetoric around me and wasn't spending enough time reading or thinking for myself. I was just absorbing the sound bites, and this is what most people do. They do what their family does, they do what their teachers do, their beliefs are installed in them and they haven't built them for themselves. So we need to facilitate the destruction of those pre-installed ideas by challenging them and then enabling them to rebuild with some real knowledge and facts and awareness of history, instead of just accepting what's given.
Yeah, I notice there's a cultural difference between people on the left and the right using those terms broadly. It's like, broadly speaking, I notice a lot of people on the right might come from families, for instance, that aren't that comfortable talking about politics at the dinner table. And as such, people on the right can often be quite introverted about their views, whereas people on the left will happily sign a petition for gay marriage or to end detention with asylum seekers. A lot of people I talk to on the right go, look, this is what I think privately, but I wouldn't like to put my name on there. So I think it is quite a challenge, because the left often seem like they have a majority on these issues. How do we engage this group of quite kind of introverted, quite shy political people that might be sympathetic to our cause?
Good question. I think the answer is by leading. You know, we're not going to convince people by telling them to do stuff. I mean, I know I'm up here telling you to be active, but I'm trying to lead the way with my own platforms and my own efforts. And I would implore each of you to take whatever leadership you can within your family, community, online. If you have something to say, you know, and you're not currently part of a social media platform or an alternative media channel, come and talk to me this weekend, because I want to get more voices on the Rational Rise. You know, like we'll go through some quality control, and I'm happy to coach as well if people need help with it. But we want a diversity of ideas on our platform. And you know, if there are any left-leaning people or outright leftists here, I would like to have reasonable conversations with them on the show. So leading the way, showing the kind of conversations we want to have by doing it publicly, I'd say that's probably the best way to engage. We do need to make people adequately aware of the threats and how they'll affect them, because people only respond to incentives that really affect them in their own life. If it's too abstract, and you know, people who should be on our side and mobilised and fighting the fight with us, if they're complacent because their life is comfortable, they've got their investments, they've got their home, their family's okay, they like their school enough, if they think they can remove themselves from the political world, well, they've got another thing coming. Politics is coming for them. So it's important that everyone speaks up to whatever degree they can.
Yeah, look, you've mentioned the importance of teachers several times. My husband and myself are teachers. And I have a grave concern working in the education sector that our students or children, our children, your children, are being brainwashed into very left ideals and a way of thinking, and not actually being able to rationalise or reason things through or consider opposite opinions.
Yeah.
Would you be able to just elaborate a bit on that? I guess, I mean, I exist within my own bubble as a teacher, but I am concerned perhaps that Australians don't realise the fact that freedom of speech is a dirty word in state high schools. That if a child comes in and expresses support of that, that they are basically being considered alternative and need to be shut down and closed down on. So what was your experience around that, and what are your ideas around how we can combat that?
Okay. My experience in school was an interesting one, because I was highly influenced by the environment around me and the teachers, and I did swallow a lot of the leftist and the greenie rhetoric that was given to me. I grew up in the Tweed Valley, so it's, if you're not a Green voter, you're a bigot. And so I absorbed a lot of it, but I was always the gadfly, and that's just my personality. I'm very low on agreeableness, so I'm always willing to challenge people and often present a devil's advocate position. So I was always doing that, and I think it was a funny thing at that time, because this was in the late 90s and early noughties that I was in high school, and my teachers publicly hated me for it, would shut me down and tell me to stop wasting everyone else's time with these debates that I'd fire up. But privately, they loved me for it, and they would say how much they enjoyed conversations with me, and they enjoyed that and they were always trying to get me to rein it in. So I think if you are teachers who are open to these ideas and who want to hear a diversity of ideas and who want to be challenged and want children to be able to think for themselves, I don't know that you would have any personal power to change the system. That has to happen at the political level. But you have great power to change the lives of children like me who do speak up. Give them a platform, even if you're told not to. Rebel in the ways that you can, and privately encourage the hell out of it, because they need it. I needed it, and it enabled me to be able to think for myself, that I had enough teachers encouraging me to do it. Satya.
I just want to make the point that I think we have to be very careful nowadays. We have this tendency to think that the alternative media is this antidote to the bias and the slots that we see in the mainstream media. But the fact is, mainstream outlets still, on average, have better resources, have better journalistic standards than a lot of the alternative media. When Alex Jones got pulled off YouTube, everyone expressed a lot of sympathy for him. They downloaded his app. Now, this is a guy, because of his lies about how Sandy Hook was completely staged and how they were crisis actors, the families of those dead kids have been harassed and have been, had to change their addresses. I mean, I think we have to, I guess as a group, as a movement, on the right, broadly speaking, be careful to draw the line and say, just because it's alternative media doesn't mean it's legitimate. We have to hold ourselves to high standards to make sure we can actually give a viable answer.
Yes, and we need those terrible ideas and those terrible actors in the sunlight so that we're able to criticise them properly. Now, on the subject of Alex Jones, he was pulled from the mainstream platforms, and of course the knee-jerk reaction from all of his followers is to say, Daddy Trump, regulate, force these companies to have it back. No, it's not the answer, and we all agreed on that point, that freedom of speech is not freedom from the consequences of poor speech or erroneous speech. So if you it's now on Alex Jones if he wants to continue. He's been so pushed into the margins by the mainstream. He needs to use his success and his wealth to innovate and create a platform for like minds. And we all need to be able to go in there. And, the truth is Alex Jones is not wrong about everything. He's terribly wrong about some things. He's not wrong about everything. And so when we other people, and it's a very leftist term, but it's useful, when we say, well, he's crazy on that one issue, even though the frogs did turn gay. But yeah, he's crazy on that one issue. Therefore, he deserves to not have a voice on anything, and therefore we'll write him off completely. No, we need to engage with the people, and with Alex Jones, we need to say, you're right on that, you're wrong on that, and have a nuanced conversation, except that we're all right and wrong about many various things. But yeah, deplatforming people, if you control and own the platform, you have an absolute right. I reserve the right to block anyone from my channel if they're repeatedly being unproductive or rude. I don't do it very much, maybe done it with 3 people, but I will reserve that right always. It's my platform, my conversations, and I set the standards, just as Google can.
With the left-focused media, what mainstream media site or channel would you say is the most supportive of the libertarian ideals? Just most in general,
Which leftist
yeah.
channel? Again, I don't know, because I try not to, unless somebody is explicitly screaming out, I'm a leftist, which leftists don't usually. I try not to box any platform or person into they're a left-wing or right-wing person. That is the lack of nuance that I'm trying to fight against. There are platforms that are typically, promoting ideas that are associated with the right that also give a voice to the left. We need to look at every single platform with that level of nuance and decide for ourselves. I don't really want to make recommendations based on categorizations like that, if you know what I mean. Probably got time for 2 more questions. Over there.
There's a thing called Real Video put out by Mike Adams, and he encourages people to put their own personal channels on that, and it's free to engage with.
Real Video
Real Video
by
Mike Adams.
Mike Adams. So if anyone's interested in a new platform, check that out. Over here.
I've just had to look up the name of the actual court case, but there was a case in the States, I think, in the 50s or 60s, something like, I think halfway through the 20th century. It's called Marsh vs. Alabama, and the gist of the case was essentially if the corporation owns, say, enough space on of what would be public property, like if they were to own a small mining town, and they would control, say, the town square, hypothetically, as a corporation, they could shut down someone else's speech. And that was ruled unconstitutional because if they own the areas where you can publicly express your views, then the First Amendment automatically applies.
It's not public expression of views if it's privately owned. Simple as that. This is the problem that the libertarian ideal faces is, the problem of the commons is real, but when we have a society, hypothetically, that's totally privately owned. Andrew and I talked about this on my channel the other week. It was a fun conversation, and we went into exploring some of the extreme good and bad possibilities of anarcho-capitalist utopia. And, the truth is some areas will be horrendous, and people will be tempted to step onto other people's property and intervene in what they're doing. And there's no easy answer to it. But yeah, if it's privately owned land, it's not a public space.
Have you read Hans Hermann Hopper's works at all?
No, I haven't yet.
I've read Democracy of the God That Failed. It's a book anyone who wants to get into what I call the dark side of libertarianism.
Yep.
It's
Fire up the choppers. Yeah.
physical removal.
There was somebody over here who gave an awful sigh because they were really disappointed I didn't choose them. So you can squeeze a quick one in.
Alright, so the left wing clearly has kind of like a monopoly over the mainstream media. They use easily digestible, feel-good language. My question is, do you think the alternative media will ever have as much influence over the over the voting population as the mainstream media does?
Of the voting population? Wow. It's an interesting one, because I think the alternative media already has much more influence than we realise or maybe even can measure. That mimetic flow of ideas is uncontrollable, and it begins often with the alternative voices. Andrew was telling me on the show the other day that only 65% of people showed up to vote in the by-election in Fremantle. That's something, you know. Why are the other 35% choosing to stay home? You know, maybe they're just... This is where I started, you know. That first election where I just threw my hands up and I went, this is bullshit, there are no good options, was a big turning point for me. Now I've swung back around to the belief that we need to be politically engaged with what we have. We need to support the parties that are making a small difference, and we need to build on them. But it's not the whole answer. But yeah, I think we might underestimate just how much impact the alternative media is having on the vote. I mean, in America it's undeniable. Trump won because of alternative media. I truly believe that. I think that's about all I've got time for, so thanks guys for the conversation, really appreciate it. I'll see you across the weekend.